Welcome to the broadcast tonight, a Charlie Rose special edition. In the inaugural episode of the Charlie Rose Brain Series, we examine the fundamental questions all of us have about how the brain functions. We will hear from some of the most renowned scientists in the field. Eric Kandel, Nobel laureate and professor at Columbia University, joins me as co-host.
I think one has to realize that these are immense questions. You're asking the most profound questions Western thought has ever challenged. And we're not going to answer it immediately, but at least we're beginning to mass the troops, both intellectually and methodologically, to approach those problems.
The first episode of the Charlie Rose Brain Series, underwritten by the Simons Foundation, coming up. The Charlie Rose Brain Series is about the most exciting scientific journey of our time, understanding the brain. The series is made possible by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Their mission is to advance the frontiers of research in the basic sciences and mathematics. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
Each day, 1 billion people won't find safe drinking water. Around the world, we're helping communities to access clean water, working to improve lives through conservation and education, one drop at a time.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York, this is a special edition of Charlie Rose.
The human brain is perhaps the most complex object in the known universe. It contains more neurons than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. The brain dictates all of our mental life, from the simplest unconscious process, such as breathing, to the most complex philosophical thoughts and emotions. In short, the brain makes us who we are. We began this evening a 12-part series exploring one of science's final frontiers, the study of the human brain. Tonight, episode 1 will examine the great mysteries of the brain. For thousands of years, civilization has pondered the origins of thought, consciousness, free will, and emotion. Until recently, these questions were the province of artists, philosophers, religious leaders, psychiatrists, and some scientists. But in the past few decades, biology has emerged as a tool with which we may solve some of life's greatest puzzles. We have learned more about the brain in the past 5 years than during all of human history combined. This knowledge has been driven by advances in technology. The decoding of the human genome allows us to look further inside our brain cells than ever before, providing a window on how genes dictate brain function and behavior. Developments in scanning technology also offer scientists unprecedented access into brain activity. New discoveries could someday promote mindfulness, increase cognition, and offer treatments for disease. The hope is that someday terrible illnesses such as depression, schizophrenia, and Alzheimer's will be history. Each month, I will interview the most knowledgeable scientists and researchers in hopes of illuminating a new topic of study. Our subjects will include perception, social interaction, aging, and creativity. By the time we complete the journey, I hope you will share my curiosity and fascination with this wonderful and remarkable organ. We are honored and very fortunate to have as our colleague on this journey, Dr. Eric Kandel. He is, as you know from watching this program, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist and professor at Columbia University. He's also affiliated with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. He received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2000 for his research into the biological mechanisms of learning and memory. So this is going to be, for me and for him and for you, a rather remarkable step as we explore this extraordinary thing that you have spent your life trying to understand. So what can we accomplish?
I think we can accomplish something extraordinary. I think we can try, through your approach to knowledge, roundtable discussion, to provide a systematic view of how brain gives rise to mind, of how the various neural circuits of the brain account for our ability to think, to act, to perceive, to feel, to explain all aspects of human cognitive functioning, and also to get some insight into the terrible diseases that haunt mankind. As you mentioned, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety states, post-traumatic stress disorders. These are horrible disorders, enormous burden for individuals and society. And in each program, we're going to begin by trying to understand the basic underlying biology of a particular mental function, and then focus in on one or more diseases that are associated with these mental functions.
Let me start with some of the basic definitions, because you mentioned two of the words, brain and mind.
Right.
What do people like you, who have spent your life dedicated to understanding brain and mind, understanding first the psychiatry and then later the science of the brain?
Mind is a series of functions carried out by the brain. Every single thing that you and I do, every aspect of our behavior is carried out by the brain. From the most simple reflex act, hitting a tennis ball, running, riding a bicycle, to the most creative aspects, running a Charlie Rose program. These things are all carried out by the brain.
There's a velocity about how much we're learning that is incredible.
You pointed this out. I would say our progress extends over more than the last 5 years, but the last 5 years have been spectacular. But what is interesting, and you pointed this out, people have been thinking about the mind since,
since they thought about humankind. Exactly.
You know, the Greek philosophers were thinking about this. But in the first 19 centuries, people were limited to the tools of philosophy. Then psychology began to be a powerful discipline. Then brain sciences came along. And what's happened in the last few decades is these fields have come together.
You are trying to bridge them together. You and
many
others.
of us. We are not. You and I are going to do this in this program. But what the field has done, it has brought psychology, brought brain sciences, brought molecular biology, brought this all together. And just like we focused on the gene as being the target of biology in the second half of the 20th century, there's every reason to believe that the mind is going to be the main focus of biological sciences in the 21st century. And this is a problem that's going to take a long time.
This is the frontier that excites
the
most people.
Not only in biological science. I would say if you ask most scientists in the world what they think is the most difficult challenge, they would say understanding the human mind. Look, Charlie, we've undergone in the history of mankind a number of intellectual revolutions. The Copernican revolution, the Newtonian revolution, the Darwinian revolution, the Freudian revolution. What is the nature of creativity that gives rise to that? If we understand the human mind, we understand what allows people to think these unusual thoughts.
As I said, we'll understand why and how we are human.
Exactly.
And these fascinating questions like where does intelligence come from? And how is it shaped?
Exactly. And how does creativity and intelligence interact?
And I mean, this is an incredible journey. I don't know that I have ever looked forward to going on a journalistic and scientific trip as much as I have this one.
I feel very much the same way. I would just elaborate to say one additional thing. This is going to be a wonderful opportunity to move education, if you will, in the new direction. You've provided a roundtable format for modern intellectual history. You bring together lowbrow, highbrow culture in the same intensity. We now want to do this to the biology of the brain. We want to see to what degree we can communicate this complex topic in straightforward, simple terms so that everyone can understand it, and with the excitement and spontaneity that can only emerge from a roundtable conversation.
One thing that always comes up when I talk to a lot of wise people, I always say to them, tell me one question that you've always wanted to know the answer to. Frequently, they say, what is consciousness? Why is that an interesting question?
Consciousness is an interesting question because I cannot determine what is going on in your head. Why you feel a particular way about something is something only you can experience, only you know about. And there is no way that I have immediate access to that. Now, maybe someday we'll have a way of visualizing neural correlates of consciousness. But at the moment, we don't have that. And this is the most mysterious problem in all of brain sciences, and since brain science is the frontier of all science, it's probably the most difficult question in all of science.
But it is also the kind of question that people in the humanities have often asked.
Oh, absolutely. The wonderful thing about brain sciences, which you have implied, is that it's a natural bridge. It's like an Esperanto between the humanities and the sciences, because the sciences are concerned with the nature of human existence, and that's the function of the brain, human existence. So bringing these two areas together, which hopefully will come, whereby neuroscientists will address some of the issues that concern humanists, and humanists will begin to interact with scientists, will be really a wonderful advance. And we've seen this in psychology. Most psychology departments and most brain science departments are indistinguishable from one another. People in psychology department are doing imaging experiments. They're asking very similar kinds of questions. So we can ultimately see a dialogue between disciplines. For example, how we respond to works of art is something that, in principle, brain scientists should be able to address.
Now, here's one of the things about the brain that I've always found fascinating. It's always changing.
That's right.
My little brain will be different at the end of this conversation than it was at the beginning.
And after the whole series, you'll be a completely different person.
But everything we do makes the brain different.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
Drinking this water
Absolutely.
makes it a different brain. It gives me a different experience.
This not only explains how we grow intellectually, but it also explains the enormous capability the brain has to recover from damage. This is also another reflection of plasticity of the brain. We also will consider that in this series.
So in the end, I may come out of this with my brain changing so much I want to wear a bow tie.
That'd be wonderful. I'd be glad to give
you
you
have
one.
a collection, do you? And we will have fun on this series.
Well, we'll have a terrific time.
We begin with the reminder that the brain is at the center of our individuality and our existence. For 18 years on this program, we have talked to some of the most fascinating brains in the world. Tonight, we begin with 4 of the leading minds in their field. John Searle is one of the best-known philosophers in the Western Hemisphere. He has taught philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley for 50 years. His recent work has incorporated discoveries from biology into the philosophy of free will, rationality, and consciousness. Gerald Fischbach. He is a neurologist and the scientific director of the Simons Foundation. He has spent a lifetime studying the connections between brain cells known as synapses. His current research concerns brain disease such as autism. Cornelia Bargmann. She has performed groundbreaking studies on the brains of microscopic worms. Her research offers insight into how genes control the function of our brain cells. She is a professor at Rockefeller University in New York. And Tony Movshan. He studies vision and perception in both primates and humans. His lab at New York University focuses on the development and function of the primate visual system. We begin with Tony Movshan as he introduces us to the anatomy of the brain.
What we have here is the beginning of a very brief tour of the structure of the human brain. We're looking at a computer-generated image of the left hemisphere of a human brain. Now, this brain is covered, as the human brain is, most prominently by a structure called the cerebral cortex, which is this gray mantle of tissue that's really almost all that's visible when you look at the human brain from the side. And the cerebral cortex is the main computing machinery of the brain, and it's also the part of the brain that's most highly evolved in humans compared to our ancestors in the animal kingdom. Now, we customarily divide the cerebral cortex into 4 lobes, and the 4 colors in the image here show you the 4 lobes and their positions. And the 4 lobes have many different functions, but we characteristically think of them as having a number of sort of primary functions. The occipital lobe here, shown in red at the back of the brain, is the main seat of visual function. That's a lobe which is particularly dear to my heart because it's the system of the brain that I work on. The temporal lobe, here shown in green, is involved in a number of complex functions. It's involved in higher processing of visual information. It's involved in the laying down of memories. And it's involved in the processing of information about sounds and in the conversion of information about sounds into linguistic representations and into the programs that allow us to speak and understand language. The parietal lobe, here shown in blue, is sort of the central spatial orientation organ